It is so difficult to avoid Yakusoku no Neverland, even reading it for the third, fourth time. The chapter 10 is filled with intensity, just like any other chapter, but more on that is Norman's strategy to outwit the possible traitor in their midst. So, if you haven't read chapter 10 yet, then please skip this, as I will be discussing spoilers for this chapter and more spoilers for the future chapters of this jailbreak arc. Colored chapter cover art for chapter 10, an eternal despair and endless labyrinth, yet we must march on. And when I look at the cover artwork for that chapter titled Control, it just amazes me because the labyrinth is exactly what Gracefield House is. It has a lot of secrets, it has a lot of library, a lot of stairs, a lot of things going around so that the kids can escape. And I love how Ray, Emma, and Norman each are leading the younger children towards the light with their lamp, and that's a very good symbolism here because the lamp guides their way towards a brighter future. And you can even see little bunny on that side, which reminds us of Connie. Gilda and Dawn are of course not with any other children yet, because at this point in this series they don't know about the escape arc yet. Then that's why they don't have any children with them other than themselves. So let's discuss the chapter. So they there's a flashback in the beginning saying that in order for them to strategize, they need tag formations. And Ray suggested to Emma different forms of tag formations to Emma, which she asked, Emma, can you memorize these 10 types of team formations by ear? Too hard for you? Nope, piece of cake, Emma said. I'm really impressed by Emma's dedication and willingness to just achieve her goals in so little time with these kids. And they're just in some of the panels, they're just trying to get away from the person who I think in this situation is Norman. Ray has tag teams of his own, Emma has hers, and even Norman is explaining to Ray and Emma that they have to lead him out of the situation. We'll need Dawn and Gilda, the two other elder siblings in our home. We need to tell them of our plans soon. And in the fan translation, Norman and Ray are still discussing how they can incapacitate Sister Crone or Isabella. Even Ray is pointing using the fork. There's only one way we have to incapacitate them. In the fan translation, that's what they use, incapacitate. Ray is even telling Norman that we're gonna be the only ones who's able to do it, as it might be too much for the kids psychologically. That's nothing that wasn't said in the English translation. In the English translation, they downgraded it to hey, maybe Emma and the others cannot do it emotionally. And then Norman was even saying normal people wouldn't be able to handle something like this. But in the fan translation, Norman mentioned technically that does make them saner than us. So it really goes to show that this is a very intense manga with psychological effects, because I think first of all, there are basics here like strategy, tactics, escape, complicated manga words, I think, that can misdirect the children. Instead of the children reading this laughing out loud, no, it's a lot of dark plot twists, a lot of dark themes in it: killing, murder, incapacitated, putting a person for the meantime into incapacity mode. And even using the word psychologically and saner, like, oh my gosh, what is the author trying to put in this manga? Like, oh my gosh, like it really continues to impress me. And I love the background of the orphanage. What I do love about the manga is that they have these little details in the manga that were not in the anime. They have that storage where they kept all the fresh food. so that they're in bottled jars, and Norman and Ray are keeping stock of the inventory, the apples, the goods, checking the lists, and while they're discussing their plans that probably they cannot incapacitate Mama Isabella or Sister Crone. If anything happens to them, then maybe the demons have them on track as well. So it really goes to show that Ray and Norman are thinking ahead of the game. And then there's the discussion that Norman mentioned that Mama Isabella is a terrifying woman because she already gave them hints about she knows who their targets are. But then she even goes on to say that there's probably speculation that Mama Isabella already knows that Ray has joined Emma and Norman, to the point that she's letting them do whatever they want. She's not restraining them per se, and even putting Sister Crone in there as another pair of eyes to watch over the kids. So really observant kids, really genius kind of thinking for these kids like 11-year-old Norman, Ray, and Emma. And to the point that Emma is wondering why did Mama really finish weeding them out? Is she finished trying to suspect who the target kids are? And then Ray came to the conclusion that there's probably a mole or a spy. And I really love how they worded that on the fan translation. They didn't write out say spy, traitor. They just said mole, which is a derogatory term for a person, of course. And so when Emma realized that there's a spy, she had this quick flashback or idea that is she gonna leave that person behind if there's a spy? But then right on the dot, she decided, no, there's no way that I cannot leave one of our siblings here, even though that person is a spy. And throughout that scene, there's an insertion comic panel where Mama Isabella and Sister Crone are discussing about the quality goods of the merchandise, how Sister Crone should not interfere more than she should. And it's as if Isabella is putting Sister Crone in a doomsday position where it's as if Sister Crone realizes that she was entrapped by Isabella, and that Isabella has been planning this all along, that she knew that her kids would outsmart her. And that's why Sister Crone was sweating and saying that they're all very special children. And then she really has that fear in her eyes that it's as if Isabella really got to her. And then going back to Emma and Ray and Norman, we saw a flashback in this one of the comic panels here, or one of the pages, where Norman was really infuriated that Sister Crone was put into the house for the very first time, and he decided that he wanted to change new ways of thinking. He is seen on his bed thinking about a strategy to lay a trap for the traitor, saying in his inner monologue that he doesn't want to lose to Mama anymore. And that's what Norman is, or who Norman is. He doesn't want to lose. He wants to win this cat and mouse game. And so it's very frightening. And even though it's only black and white, it just goes to show that Norman is thinking this over his head, that he's not willing to be subjugated, or he's not willing to lose to Mama Isabella, no matter what the game is or what the plans are. This was to the surprise of Ray and Emma, especially Ray, because he has that a little bit of fear on his like that not teardrop, but just something like to show that Ray did not expect that Norman is gonna lay a trap or a net for the traitor or the spy. And it really just goes to show the flashback with Norman thinking on his bed. Norman is really taking this seriously, and that really frightens me just by looking at him. Ray, of course, mentioned to Norman that there's gonna be only 10 days before I finish the tracking device. The tracking device, the device that will destroy the tracking device. Instead of 2 weeks, it's gonna be 10 days. And to Emma and Ray's surprise, they're gonna execute the plan on 10 days, Norman said. And that last panel of Norman with his half of his face being covered by the darkness or the shade really goes to show that Norman is not an ordinary child. I should have seen that. I know he's the smartest among the three kids in Gracefield House, but it shows and it foreshadows his dark side. Whenever Norman gives that terrifying stare, glare, or look, I just got bone chilling. It's as if looking at Light Yagami from Death Note, where you're ready to murder or kill, and it's really frightening. And this is what I loved about the first arc. I really love Norman in the first arc, but I love him even more in the future arcs. I know he became like a bad guy or a demon mastermind. His plans to execute the royal nobles or the queen, very flawless, and I wouldn't have guessed that he is the mastermind behind all this. And to think that in this arc, Ray is the person showing shady sides, showing dark sides, but Ray turned out to a new leaf because of Emma, and I really love about that on Ray's personality. It just goes to show that Emma's optimism is very it can be carried to other people like Ray, Anna, Nat, everyone else. And with Norman, because he was shipped out in later chapters because he decided to march to his death, he was separated from Emma's optimism, and that just misguided his morality. But that's the beauty of this series. And have you seen volume 18 cover artwork? That's really phenomenal. It's beautiful. It raises the stake. I mean, Norman's position as the anti-hero slash anti-villain of the series, even though he's a main character, our protagonist Emma loves him so much, and I'm really excited to see where their relationship or their romance would go. I really love the strong bond or the friendship between Emma and Ray in future arcs, but for me, I'm still rooting for Norman and Emma because for me, Norman needs Emma's love. He needs more of her love. Ray had been like somewhat healed, cured during the first or the second arc of the series. But then I know with our boy Norman, he also needs healing, especially since he stayed in Lambda being experimented for almost 2 years and he became insane. But with Ray, he's been suffering for almost like 12 years of his life, knowing about the secret, knowingly or intentionally letting other kids like Connie, House, Sedi be shipped out, even to the point of testing the device to destroy the tracking devices, even using that machine that he's making, testing them out on kids knowingly so that Emma and Norman won't get sacrificed. It's really just goes to show that I don't know who had the who suffered more. I don't know which person suffered more, Ray or Norman. Ray suffered for almost 12 years, knowing the secret, bearing the burden on his own. And then Norman, even though he only suffered for 2 years, well, he suffered drastically as well, being experimented even only for 2 years. So both of them have different external factors influencing their attitudes and character development. I am so glad that Ray, even in the span of 2 years, turned out a new leaf because of Emma. But on Norman's case, he turned out on the bad side in just 2 years because he's without Emma. So it really just goes to show that Emma is the best girl in this series, and without her, her love is not gonna be her love can't overflow to these two boys. I really want a one true trio at the end of this series, but we'll see how it goes. Given that this series started with just the three of them, I'm really wishing that they still stay together after all their adventures. If we if this series gets a happy ending. So that's my review for chapter 10 of The Promised Neverland. I'm really when I read this for the very first time, I didn't expect that the traitor would be you know who is the traitor. So I didn't even realize the small hints that's dropped on this chapter. So that's why I'm very glad to be reviewing this. Thank you very much and have a great day.